Pastor Ed here with Daily Devotions for Thursday, June the 22nd, 2023. We continue to look at our reading from this past Sunday, Genesis 12, verse 10, all the way up to 13, verse 1. Just to kind of recap, Abraham had been promised a great nation would come from him, that he'd be blessed, that he'd be a blessing to others. He was sent to the promised land, the land of Canaan. He gets there finally. And there's a famine. And it seems very clear to me that all along the way, God has been directing him. But here, the famine. And so Abram decides to go to Egypt. The fact that the lesson doesn't say that God suggested this to him leaves one with the impression that kind of Abraham takes things into his own hands. But and even worse, as they're getting close to Egypt, he's a little bit concerned because Sarai is very beautiful, and he thinks, well, if it may go poorly for me as her husband. So why don't you just say that I'm your sister? Because, the custom in those days would have been that if it came to that they would negotiate with him if it was the sister to possibly arrange a marriage or something like that. So he's kind of, if it comes to that, he's thinking we could buy some time. Otherwise, he thinks they might just out and out kill him. So we pick up in the last verse of yesterday, the verse 13, say you're my sister so that it may go well with me because of you and that my life might be spared on your account. We pick it up in verse 14. We're going to read 14, 15, and 16. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful, just as he suspected they might. And when the officials of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Come back to that in a second. And for her sake, he dealt well with Abram, and he had sheep and oxen, male donkeys, male and female slaves, female donkeys, and camels. And so everything kind of works out as he anticipated, except for one thing. As David McLemore suggests, he had planned for the usual kind of situation. He didn't plan for the Pharaoh, though. As he says, a normal Egyptian would negotiate it with him for Sarai, but Pharaoh doesn't need to. He just takes what he wants. When he hears that she's his sister, he simply takes her into his harem. And now Abram has a real problem because, of course, the promise of God is in jeopardy. It's as if he didn't kind of think it through. He didn't think about what the possible consequences or results might be. And to make matters even worse, in a sense, he's kind of given Sarai away, and in return, he's benefited financially. All those gifts from Pharaoh, the animals and the slaves and everything else, he's rewarded with, as McLemore says, with earthly goods for a spiritual blunder. And he's surrounded by riches, while Sarai, he says, sat worried in Pharaoh's harem. What a disaster. And so this whole question is here, that we've been talking about, is Abraham going to trust? He's shown evidence that he hasn't trusted God, that the promises that God made are good and sure and can be depended upon. Here he's kind of taking matters into his own hands. He made up his own plan. He thought he was kind of saving his life, but he kind of made a mess of things. As Devin Biles suggests, that equally repugnant to Abram's treatment of his wife was the fact that he financially gained from it. Now we'll talk about tomorrow about what it meant that she was taken into his harem, whether that implied everything that it might imply, and as I even hinted at in my sermon on Sunday. But the whole idea here is that Abram had a plan, a misguided plan, obviously, didn't trust God, thought he would figure out a way to deal with this possible situation if it arose, and it did arise. And so he kind of didn't think things through, doesn't anticipate that Pharaoh just takes her. Now he's lost Sarai, but he's rewarded for her. That's not a good thing at all. And again, I've been talking about the situation that I once had in college where I had a course that I hadn't been going to, and the deadline for dropping it had passed. So I not only risked losing the money, but also getting like a failing grade. I forget exactly what the policy was at that point. So I came up with a plan, and I went to the coach and asked him if he could fix it. Can you fix it so that even though the deadline has passed, that I can actually drop the course? Well, as it turns out, that's exactly what happened. I don't know how he did it. Um, I think there was an associate dean or somebody. The coach later told me, he went and talked to him, and you know, they kind of made a little situation there, a little deal, and so I was dropped from the course without any penalty. Problem solved, I thought. Um, as I'll share tomorrow, it didn't quite work out that way. I didn't think things through. I didn't anticipate what might happen. Abram didn't anticipate that by saying Sarai was his sister, he thought he would buy himself some time and that he could just, turn down any negotiations for her hand in marriage, and that they could, escape the famine for the time that they needed to and then return home safely. But Pharaoh just upsets those plans by taking her into his house, taking her into his harem, taking her for all intents and purposes to be his wife. And oh wow, now the whole situation is different. That was not something that Abram had anticipated. Again, he didn't think things through. And I've been telling the story of my experience because so often we do that. We may not be like Abram. We may not say our wife or our spouse is just a sister or brother, but you may have been in a situation similar to mine where you kind of think, well, maybe I can figure a way to get out of this tough spot, and pull some strings, but haven't really thought it through. So we're going to continue that, what the repercussions of Abram's tragic, fatal decision here was, what the result of it is, and also kind of what the unintended consequences of my not thinking my situation through either, what those unintended consequences turned out to be. So I will share all of that tomorrow. Until then, take care. Have a great day. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.